The wounded receive treatment according to medieval medical knowledge that blends Islamic advances with European traditions. Arab physicians had translated and improved upon Greek texts, developing surgical techniques that remain sophisticated by any standard. Crusader physicians learned from captured Muslim doctors, creating a hybrid medical tradition unique to Outremer, but survival rates remain low by modern standards. Perhaps half the seriously wounded die within days, despite the best available care. Infection kills more soldiers than initial trauma. Gangrene spreads through compound fractures. Blood loss weakens men beyond recovery. Medieval warfare produces casualties that contemporary medicine cannot adequately treat. December 8th. Saladin reaches Cairo with the survivors of his once mighty army. Contemporary Arab sources describe his physical transformation as shocking. Hair turned gray overnight, shoulders bent under invisible weight, eyes that once blazed with confidence now haunted by images of defeat. The psychological trauma affects his decision-making for months afterward. His confidence lies shattered on the field at Montgisard. Muslim chroniclers call it the worst defeat in Islamic military history since the First Crusade. A disaster so complete that restoring Ayyubid prestige requires a decade of careful campaigning. Only Saladin's victory at Hattin 10 years later will erase the memory of this humiliation. The political ramifications extend throughout the Islamic world. Damascus nobles who supported Saladin question his ability to unite Syria and Egypt under competent leadership. Aleppo's Zengid rulers, still independent of Ayyubid control, used the defeat to justify continued resistance to Saladin's expansion. From Baghdad to Cordoba, Muslim intellectuals debate whether divine favor has shifted away from the Kurdish upstart who promised to drive the Franks into the sea. Economic consequences prove equally devastating. The Egyptian treasury, drained by military preparations and campaign expenses, faces bankruptcy. Trade routes between Cairo and Damascus suffer disruption as merchant caravans avoid territories controlled by an apparently weakened regime. Tax revenues from Syria decline as local governors question Cairo's ability to protect them from Crusader retaliation. Military recruitment becomes problematic when potential soldiers learn that service under Saladin might mean death on foreign battlefields for no strategic gain. The prestige that attracted volunteers from across the Islamic world evaporates in a single afternoon. Building new armies requires payments in gold rather than appeals to religious duty. December 3rd, Baldwin returns to Jerusalem in triumph through crowds that line the streets from the Jaffa Gate to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The holy city that should have fallen before Christmas remains in Crusader hands. The teenager with rotting flesh has bought his kingdom another decade of life. His entry becomes the stuff of legend. The leper king riding through Jerusalem with captured banners trailing behind his horse. Muslim prisoners shuffling in chains. Wagons loaded with enough plunder to fund the kingdom's defense for years. The victory celebration lasts 3 days according to contemporary chroniclers. Every church bell in Jerusalem rings continuously. Wine flows freely in streets normally governed by martial discipline. Citizens who fled their homes during Saladin's advance return to find their city not only intact, but enriched by Muslim gold. For a brief moment, the kingdom of Jerusalem feels invincible again. But Baldwin himself remains realistic about what Montgisard accomplished and what it failed to achieve. Saladin still controls Egypt and most of Syria. The demographic imbalance between Christians and Muslims in the Levant continues to favor Islamic reconquest. Military victories can delay inevitable defeat, but cannot reverse fundamental strategic realities. The king uses his victory dividend wisely. Captured gold funds, new fortifications at Kerak and Montreal, blocking Saladin's future access to the Jordan Valley. Prisoners get ransomed for enormous sums that fill the royal treasury. Diplomatic missions travel to Constantinople, Rome, and Paris, seeking military aid from Christian powers impressed by news of the miracle at Montgisard, January 1178. Reinforcements begin arriving from Europe as word of Baldwin's victory spreads. Henry II of England contributes funds for new castle construction. French nobles organize expeditions to join the defense of Jerusalem. The Pope declares a new indulgence for warriors willing to serve in the Holy Land. Montgisard generates momentum that temporarily reverses the kingdom's decline. Saladin learns from his defeat with the intellectual honesty that marks great military commanders. Never again will he allow his army to become scattered and vulnerable while operating in enemy territory. Never again will he underestimate Frankish determination or tactical skill. When he returns in 1187 for the campaign that ends at Hattin, he brings twice as many men and keeps them under iron discipline until the moment of battle. The lesson of the Leper King's charge burns into his memory like a brand. Victory requires more than numerical superiority. It demands constant vigilance, tactical precision, and respect for enemies capable of turning desperate situations into triumphs. Saladin becomes a better general because of his defeat at Montgisard, but Baldwin IV never lives to see that final reckoning. Leprosy claims him in 1185 at 24 years old, his body consumed by the same disease that somehow failed to break his spirit during 8 years of impossible military victories. His rotting flesh gives out just as his kingdom needs him most. The timing reflects medieval life's brutal arithmetic. Heroes die young while mediocrity endures. His successors lack his genius for the impossible. Guy de Lusignan, crowned king through marriage to Baldwin's sister, Sibylla, possesses none of the strategic vision or tactical innovation that characterized the Leper King's campaigns. When Saladin comes again in 1187-4, there is no miracle at Hattin, only the end of everything the First Crusade had won. The Battle of Hattin unfolds like Montgisart in reverse. This time, Saladin maintains discipline while the Crusaders make tactical errors. This time, Muslim forces outnumber Christians by manageable ratios rather than impossible margins. This time, experience trumps desperation as Saladin implements lessons learned during his humiliation 8 years earlier. The Kingdom of Jerusalem collapses within months of Hattin. Cities that resisted Muslim conquest for 90 years surrender without siege. Only Tyre holds out under Conrad of Montferrat's leadership. The Crusader achievement crumbles like sandcastles before an incoming tide. Yet, historians studying both battles recognize fundamental differences that explain opposite outcomes. At Montgisard, Baldwin possessed tactical surprise, superior position, enemy overconfidence, and personal leadership that inspired superhuman effort from ordinary soldiers. At Hattin, Guy lacked every advantage his predecessor had exploited. Circumstance matters as much as capability in determining military success. Still, for one shining moment on the plains of Montgisard, 4,000 Christian warriors proved that courage could triumph over numbers. That leadership could overcome impossible odds. That a dying boy with one good arm could humble the greatest general of his age and buy his kingdom 10 more years of independence. The white limestone around Tel Es Safi still remembers that day. Archaeological excavations conducted in 2021 uncovered mass graves containing hundreds of skeletons dated to the late 12th century. Cut marks on the bones match weapon patterns from medieval warfare, arrowheads embedded in rib cages, sword cuts through skull fragments, spear points driven through vertebrae. Physical proof of the slaughter Baldwin unleashed on that November afternoon 847 years ago. The excavation team, led by Professor Sarah Ben-David from Hebrew University, identified distinct burial patterns that distinguish between Crusader and Muslim dead. Christian burials follow east-west orientation with personal effects intact. Muslim burials face Mecca with evidence of hasty interment by surviving comrades. The archaeological record preserves the chaos of medieval battle in forensic detail. Carbon dating confirms the timeline established by historical sources. Bone collagen analysis reveals nutritional patterns consistent with Egyptian and Syrian populations for Muslim remains, Palestinian and European diets for Christian dead, isotope studies of tooth enamel tract geographic origins. Many Muslim soldiers originated hundreds of miles from the battlefield, supporting contemporary accounts of Saladin's multinational army. Weapon analysis provides insights into medieval military technology. Crusader swords show superior metallurgy with higher carbon content and more sophisticated tempering techniques. Muslim arrows demonstrate advanced fletching methods and composite bow construction. Both sides employed cutting-edge military hardware that represented decades of technological development. The excavation also revealed coins from Saladin's treasury scattered across the battlefield, gold dinars minted in Cairo bearing the Sultan's name and titles, now corroded green with age, silver dirhams from Damascus workshops, their Arabic inscriptions still legible after 8 centuries in Palestinian soil, the wealth of 2 empires abandoned on a field where mathematics failed and miracles proved stronger than logic. Personal artifacts tell individual stories within the larger catastrophe. A Templar knight's seal ring bearing the order's distinctive cross, a Muslim warrior's prayer beads carved from Damascus ivory, a Crusader squire's spurs, still bearing traces of blood and leather. Each item represents a life ended violently far from home in service to causes that seemed worth dying for. The battlefield preservation results from unique geological conditions. Limestone soil provides excellent drainage while preventing organic decay. Lack of subsequent development left the site undisturbed for 8 centuries. Modern excavation techniques recover evidence that contemporary chroniclers could never document, the physical reality behind their literary accounts. Medieval battlefields rarely preserve such complete archaeological records. Most sites suffer from agricultural disruption, urban development, or natural erosion. Montgisard offers historians unprecedented access to material evidence that confirms, contradicts, or supplements written sources. The intersection of archaeology and history creates a more complete understanding of medieval warfare. The discovery challenges popular misconceptions about Crusader-Muslim relations. Artifacts show extensive trade connections between opposing armies. Muslim weapons incorporate European metalworking techniques. Christian equipment displays Islamic decorative motifs. Even during active warfare, technological and cultural exchange continued across religious boundaries. Modern military historians study Montgisard for lessons applicable to contemporary asymmetric warfare. The battle demonstrates how smaller forces can defeat larger enemies through superior tactics, intelligence, and leadership. Urban combat in Iraq and Afghanistan reflects similar principles. Local knowledge, tactical surprise, and motivated soldiers often trump numerical advantages. The Israeli Defense Forces Academy includes Montgisard in its curriculum as an example of successful defensive operations. Officers analyze Baldwin's decision-making process, his exploitation of enemy vulnerabilities, and his ability to maintain unit cohesion under extreme pressure. 850 years later, the Leper King still teaches military professionals about leadership under impossible circumstances. Strategic implications extend beyond tactical considerations. Montgisard bought the Crusader states a crucial decade of survival, allowing time for diplomatic initiatives, economic recovery, and military reinforcement from Europe. Without this breathing space, the Kingdom of Jerusalem might have collapsed in 1177 rather than 1187. The battle's psychological impact on both sides shaped subsequent military and political developments. Christian confidence, restored by Baldwin's victory, enabled more aggressive policies toward Muslim neighbors. Islamic caution, induced by Saladin's defeat, led to more careful planning and greater resource allocation for future campaigns. Religious interpretations of the battle varied according to faith perspective. Christian chroniclers attributed victory to divine intervention, viewing the outcome as proof of God's favor toward the Crusader cause. Muslim sources blamed defeat on tactical errors and overconfidence, while maintaining faith in ultimate Islamic triumph. Both interpretations served political purposes within their respective communities. The legend of Montgisard transcended historical reality to become myth within decades of the actual battle. Popular songs celebrated Baldwin's heroism throughout medieval Europe. Islamic poetry mourned the fallen while promising future vindication. These cultural artifacts preserve emotional responses to events that shaped an entire generation's worldview. Medieval medicine struggled to treat Baldwin's condition effectively. Leprosy remained poorly understood, despite extensive documentation in biblical and classical sources. Treatment relied primarily on herbal remedies, dietary restrictions, and spiritual interventions, rather than scientific medicine. The king's ability to function militarily, despite progressive neurological damage, demonstrates extraordinary determination and probably exceptional pain tolerance. Contemporary medical analysis suggests Baldwin suffered from tuberculoid leprosy, a form that affects peripheral nerves while leaving cognitive function intact. This diagnosis explains his continued ability to make complex strategic decisions while losing motor control over extremities. Modern treatment could have managed his condition effectively, but medieval physicians lacked necessary pharmaceutical knowledge. The political structure of the Kingdom of Jerusalem reflected unique circumstances created by conquest and settlement in a hostile environment. Unlike European feudalism, which developed gradually over centuries, Crusader institutions emerged rapidly under military pressure. The result combined French legal traditions, Byzantine administrative practices, and Islamic commercial customs into a hybrid system unlike anything in contemporary Europe. Baldwin's personal rule demonstrated remarkable political sophistication despite his youth and illness. He balanced competing noble factions, maintained alliance networks with Christian neighbors, and negotiated truces with Muslim powers when military solutions proved impossible. His diplomatic skills complemented military talents to extend the kingdom's survival beyond what raw force could achieve. Economic factors underlying the conflict centered on control of lucrative trade routes connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. Jerusalem's strategic position commanded access to spices, silks, and precious metals that generated enormous wealth for whoever controlled them. Religious motivations inspired individual participants, but economic interests drove political leadership on both sides. The human cost of medieval warfare extended beyond immediate battlefield casualties to include long-term demographic and social consequences. Repeated campaigns drained population centers of able-bodied men. Agricultural production declined as farmers became soldiers. Family structures collapsed under pressure of constant military recruitment. These broader impacts often determined political outcomes more than tactical victories or defeats. Montgisard represents the high watermark of Crusader military achievement in the late 12th century. Never again would Christian forces achieve such dramatic success against overwhelming odds. Baldwin's genius lay in recognizing that survival required calculated risks that rational analysis would reject. Sometimes, desperation creates opportunities that careful planning cannot achieve. No crown can outweigh a grave. They call him the Leper King. 16 years old, flesh rotting from his bones, facing the most feared general in the Islamic world. November the 25th, 1177, a handful of knights against an empire. The roads to Jerusalem empty. Most of the Crusader army locked in a pointless siege 400 miles north. Saladin sees his moment. 26,000 men pour across the Egyptian border like a black tide. But there's something Saladin doesn't know. Something that will turn this easy conquest into history's most shocking upset. A teenage king who refuses to die, who can barely grip a sword but won't surrender his kingdom, who's about to teach the Sultan of Egypt that numbers mean nothing when you're fighting for your life. Baldwin IV, the boy who should have been dead. Instead, he's about to hand Saladin the worst defeat of his career. If you value documented medieval and Crusader history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from William of Tyre's contemporary chronicle, written by Baldwin's own chancellor who witnessed these events firsthand, and Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani's chronicle written for Saladin himself, both verified by the Medieval Warfare Journal published in March-April 2016. Now back to the information. November 18th, 1177, Saladin crosses from Egypt with his war machine. William of Tyre puts the number at 26,000. The anonymous Syrian chronicler breaks it down: 12,000 Turkish cavalry, 9,000 Arab troops, plus 1,000 Mamluks of Saladin's personal guard. These aren't farmers with spears. These are the elite who conquered Damascus, who drove the Byzantines from Syria, who united the Islamic world under one banner. The plan is surgical. Hit Gaza, pin down whatever forces exist at Ascalon, march north to Jerusalem while the Crusader nobility wastes time besieging Harim in northern Syria with Philip of Alsace. It should work. Every military mind says it should work. November 22nd, Saladin's vanguard reaches Ascalon. Inside the fortress walls, 375 knights wait with their teenage king, that's it. 375 heavy cavalry against an empire. Baldwin IV had ridden out from Jerusalem 3 days earlier, racing south with every man he could gather. Renaud de Chatillon rode beside him, the Lord of Transjordan, just released from 16 years in an Aleppo dungeon. Baldwin of Ibelin brought his men from Ramla. Balian of Ibelin, his brother, Jocelyn III of Edessa, old blood, noble names, but still just hundreds against thousands. At Gaza, 80 Templar knights break out of their besieged fortress. Led by Grand Master Odo de Saint-Amand, they carve through enemy lines to reach their king. Now Baldwin has 455 heavy cavalry. Still impossible odds, still not enough to matter. Saladin moves fast. He splits his force, leaves enough men to watch Ascalon and Gaza, takes the rest north toward the Holy City. His cavalry fans out across the coastal plain, burning everything between Ramla and Jerusalem. November 23rd, Ramla falls. The great market town, backbone of Crusader agriculture, goes up in smoke. November 24th, Lydda burns. The roads north are open. Jerusalem lies 40 miles away. That night, Saladin makes camp near Montgassard. Arabic sources call it Tel Safi, the White Hill. His army spreads across the plain like a black carpet. Tomorrow, Jerusalem. Tomorrow, the end of the Crusader kingdom. But Baldwin isn't finished. November 24th, dawn. The gates of Ascalon swing open. 455 knights ride out in formation. Behind them come the infantry, every able-bodied man from Ascalon, Gaza, and the surrounding settlements. Burgesses, merchants, craftsmen. Men who've never held a spear in anger, but who know what happens when Saladin's army reaches their homes. The contemporary sources don't give exact numbers for the infantry, but battlefield archaeology and casualty reports suggest 3,000 to 4,000 foot soldiers. Still outnumbered 6 to 1. Still marching toward certain death. Baldwin rides in the center of the column, 16 years old, leprosy eating at his right arm until he can barely grip the reins. His face still unmarked by the disease that will destroy him within 8 years. Contemporary accounts describe him as handsome, skilled in horsemanship despite his condition. He'd trained since childhood to fight one-handed, controlling his mount with his knees and left hand alone. They shadow Saladin's army along the coast, staying just out of sight, waiting for the moment when overconfidence becomes catastrophe. November 25th, midday. Saladin's army reaches Montgassard, 6 miles northeast of Ascalon. The Sultan grows careless. Victory seems certain. His forces spread out across the plain to forage and rest. The tight discipline that conquered Egypt dissolves into a sprawling, disorganized mass. Horses unsaddled. Men scattered across miles of open ground. No proper formation. No defensive line. Saladin himself makes camp with his bodyguard near the White Hill. From here, He can see the road to Jerusalem stretching north across the plain. 40 miles, 2 days, march, the greatest prize in Christendom within his grasp. That's when Baldwin strikes. The Crusader army appears on the ridge above Montgisar like a vision from hell. 455 knights in perfect formation. The true cross raised high in the center of the line. Behind them, 3,000 infantry advancing in lockstep, sunlight glinting off mail and lance points, war cries echoing across the plain. Saladin's men scramble for their weapons. Horses bolt. Officers shout contradictory orders. The Sultan tries to rally his center, positioning his flanks near the tell for protection. Too late. The Franks are already charging. Baldwin raises his sword with his one good arm, the signal his men have waited for. 455 lances drop into position. Hooves thunder against the earth. The greatest heavy cavalry charge in medieval warfare history smashes into Saladin's unprepared center like the fist of God. The Muslim line crumples. Panic spreads from the center outward as Crusader knights punch through toward Saladin's command post. Taqi ad-Din, Saladin's nephew, rallies the left wing but takes massive casualties. His son Ahmad dies in the fighting. Dia ad-Din Isa, the famous jurist, falls prisoner to the Franks. Saladin finds himself surrounded. His personal guard, those 1,000 elite Mamluks, form a circle around their master, but the Frankish cavalry keeps coming, wave after wave. The Sultan escapes only by mounting a racing camel and fleeing toward Egypt, leaving his entire baggage train behind. The battle becomes a rout. Saladin's army dissolves into scattered groups of terrified men fleeing across the desert. The Crusader infantry joins the pursuit, cutting down stragglers for 12 miles. Contemporary sources describe rivers of blood soaking into the white earth around Montgisard. Bodies piled so high that Baldwin's men can barely count them. By nightfall, Saladin's 26,000-man army has ceased to exist as a fighting force. Only 2,600 men, 1 in 10, make it back to Egypt alive. The rest lie dead on the plain or wander lost in the desert. Prey to Bedouin slavers. December 8th, Saladin reaches Cairo with the survivors. His hair has turned gray, his confidence shattered. Muslim chroniclers call it the worst defeat in Islamic military history since the First Crusade. A disaster so complete that only Saladin's victory at Hattin 10 years later will restore his reputation, but the numbers tell a different story. Baldwin's forces take casualties too. 1,100 dead, 750 wounded according to Frankish sources, nearly half his army. For any other commander, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. For Baldwin, fighting a war of survival against impossible odds, it's a miracle. December 3rd, Baldwin returns to Jerusalem in triumph. The holy city that should have fallen before Christmas remains in Crusader hands. The teenager with rotting flesh has bought his kingdom another decade of life. In 2021, archaeologists working near modern Tel Safit uncovered mass graves containing hundreds of skeletons dated to the late 12th century. Cut marks on the bones match weapon patterns from medieval warfare. The placement corresponds exactly to Arabic descriptions of the Montgisard battlefield, physical proof of the slaughter Baldwin unleashed on that November day 847 years ago. Saladin learned from Montgisar, never again would he underestimate the Franks. Never again would he allow his army to become scattered and vulnerable. When he returned in 1187 for the campaign that ended at Hattin, he brought twice as many men and kept them under iron discipline. The lesson of the Leper King's charge burned into his memory like a brand, but Baldwin IV never lived to see that final reckoning. Leprosy claimed him in 1185 at 24 years old. His rotting body gave out just as his kingdom needed him most. His successors lacked his genius for the impossible. When Saladin came again, there was no miracle at Hattin, only the end of everything the First Crusade had won. Still, for one shining moment on the plains of Montgisar, 4,000 Christian warriors proved that courage could triumph over numbers, that leadership could overcome impossible odds, that a dying boy with one good arm could humble the greatest general of his age. The white earth around Tel es-Safi still remembers that day. Still holds the bones of men who learned too late that some battles aren't won by counting soldiers. They're won by those willing to charge into certain death for something greater than themselves. No crown can outweigh a grave.